Our group did the builder quest, which meant we designed our own video game. We took inspiration from the bogus readings about political games and hoped to create a game that was fun but also provoked the player to think a little bit about what the game could possibly comment on. That thing we chose to comment on is social media, and specifically how the cost of success through an increased following on these platforms comes at the cost of a deteriorating mental state. In addition to the game, we will have a paper that uses readings from our focus to analyze the mechanics of our game. In this video, we'll try to present the prototype of our game and explain some of our choices in our game design. The overarching premise for our game is that the player is a social media influencer who is trying to accumulate more and more fame. We've included several mechanisms to create a similar feeling of frenzy that is evoked when influencers try to manage all of these social media sites. We took inspiration from the game called Overcooked, which we chose because it's a fast-paced game that requires the player to divide their attention amongst multiple tasks. This overwhelmed feeling is important as it impresses upon the player how an influencer's mental health might suffer. Players will have to manage all 4 games, making demands upon their attention and abilities. Those 4 games are Pixagram, MeToo, Twitter, and TalkTick. Each game serves as a different purpose, which we will go through individually. The first game is Twitter, which emulates influencers' need to make split-second decisions by giving the player tweets to either ignore or retweet. If the player retweets the right kind of tweet, they will gain followers and popularity. However, if the player doesn't make the right decision, they will lose a following and their mental health will take a hit. Much like the real world, a seemingly small mistake can have amplified effects when in the world of social media. Twitter notifications will pop up roughly every 30 seconds in this corner of the screen, and players can click on it to access the game. The next game is MeToo, which is similar to Pixagram in that it takes more time for the player to complete. The user has to select a thumbnail and then upload the video by traveling through a minigame where they must dodge incoming obstacles of classic internet negativity. The more obstacles they hit, the more views their video will lose. One mechanism of this upload minigame is that the player can only focus on that one game, which means that the player will likely miss out on other games like Twitter and TalkTick, which require some sort of decisive action. The next game is Pixagram, which is meant to comment on how the increased use of filters usually leads to more followers, but at the same time portrays a false version of the user. The more obviously fake filters will lead to more negative comments on the user's post, which then detract from their mental state. Pixagram takes a little bit more time to interact with, requiring the player to drag puzzle pieces into randomly generated slots to touch up on their picture. Lastly, TalkTick takes a DDM approach to learning all the newest and trendy dances by having the user take their hand off the mouse to use the keys in order to learn the newest dance. TalkTick is meant to show how quickly the trends come in, so the user will need to learn a new dance roughly every 45 seconds to stay on trend and maintain or grow their following. TalkTick is more similar to Twitter because of how rapidly the player must respond to the game's demands. All of these games may be simple when isolated, but the player will have to contend with all 4 of these games simultaneously in order to continuously gain a larger following and more fame. The primary way that our games interact with each other is by making different demands on the player's time. Both MeToo and Pixagram require the player to have a sustained interaction in order to finish the game and reap the following rewards. TalkTick and Twitter, on the other hand, have periodic occurrences, and players cannot do multiple games at once, so they must make decisions for where to lose followers or their own mental health. The title of our game is Superfluencer, which at first might sound like super and influencer combined, when in fact we wanted to emphasize the words superfluous and influencer. We hope that our game impresses upon users how the very serious consequences of social media are not worth gaining fame over, and generally these social media sites are superfluous. Some of our games also ask the player to make choices that they are uncomfortable with, but this is again needed to highlight how the cost of gaining fame is often at the cost of compromising one's own ethics. We hope that our users are able to come away from Superfluencer thinking about how their own social media use might be unnecessarily harming their mental health, but more importantly, we hope that we have created an enjoyable gameplay experience.